Hey, good evening. It's Friday, October 11th, and welcome back to Everyday Talk 24/7. Such an honor to have you with me tonight. Tonight I'm going to be talking about God's gracious warnings. God's gracious warnings. We've kind of gotten lulled to sleep in thinking that God is not involved in everything that happens. But He is involved. And most importantly, He's a God of grace and compassion and mercy. But He's also a God of justice. He's patient with us. He's calling us back to repentance. And He does things as warnings. We need to heed them as warnings. You know, if you read some of the news stories when you read about Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, you'll see things like the wrath of nature or nature's fury. This is not about nature. This is about God. There's one more element here, and it's important for us to grasp this. One more element that we'll bring in terms of God's warnings. Last night again, and that was October 10th, last night, Thursday night, there was another solar storm, and the Aurora Borealis, the northern lights, again, got way south than they normally do. Not quite as far south as and intense as the storm in May, but even in my neighborhood down here in South Carolina, out in the bushes here, you can see again the impact of those lights, and you'll see that on the screen right now. And it's amazing, God's power. But there's something else behind these lights. They're beautiful to look at, but they represent a storm. They represent the activity and power of God. They represent the ability of God to wipe out our entire communication system. Because these storms pose a threat to our satellites. They pose a threat to our power grids. It's a fascinating thing to research and to study, but they do. So when we have something like last night, God is warning us once again. He is in control. And with this a little more intensity, we would lose our satellite, our communication satellites. That means no communication, no banking, no GPS, no ability to communicate. If those satellites went and the power grid goes, we'd not be able to communicate. Now here's a connection for you. I'm going to read the first few verses in Genesis chapter 11. Now the whole world had one language and common speech. As men moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used bricks instead of stone and tar instead of mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build a city for ourselves, with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the earth." Now, God had commanded what? For man, humans, to multiply and to go throughout the face of the earth, to occupy and control the earth for the glory of God. This group of individuals say, "No, we're going to stay here. We're not going to obey God. We're going to stay right here and do things our own way. We're going to make a name for ourselves. We're not going to be involved in following God. We're going to make our own reputation great." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building. The Lord said, "If, as one people, with the same speaking the same language, they've begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. This is why it is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world, and from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the entire earth. to see the connection here between our communication and satellite system. I'm not saying that the Lord has to do this, but if He wanted to make us confused to stop our progress, taking away our ability to communicate globally would be a way of doing that, because we've become very dependent upon that. Almost all of our transactions today are electronic, and they ultimately are governed by satellites. If we lose that ability, we lose the ability to function as we are now. And all of our dreams of greatness would vanish like that. Think about that. Whether it's these storms, whether it's the geomagnetic storm that we just experienced, God is capable of altering our lives in such a way so that we have to get it. We need to be praying for repentance, for grace, but we need to be talking about the wonder of God and what we give up when we praise ourselves. Remember, these folks wanted to make a name for themselves. They wanted to throw off God and throw off God's requirement of going throughout the world. We're going to stay here. We're going to defy God. Nothing's going to stop us. Kind of sounds like our talk today, doesn't it? Where people think they can do whatever we want. Well, there are limitations on that. The power of God, the fear of God, the justice of God, but most importantly, the mercy and compassion of God. God could have wiped out the communication system last night. He could wipe it out tonight. But He warns us. He's calling us to come back to Him, to trust Him, to fear Him righteously, to trust Him, to live the way that He's called us to. Not because He wants to hurt us, but because He wants us to thrive, flourish, and know Him more deeply. God's gracious warnings. Think about that. God is calling us back. May we see it, not be so foolish as to feel like those people at the Tower of Babel who think we can do anything we want and try and make a name for ourselves. And that's the thought for this night. Again, I love your thoughts and feedback. You have a great night. And, Lord willing, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.